Hello everyone, here we are again. Again, I say, because this is the third part of a video I'm making on, making season 2 of Telltale's The Walking Dead better, trying to expand on left out details that were in the game and were never explained or explored. Be sure to watch those videos before watching this. Don't forget to give them a go, and also remember to like those videos and consider subscribing to the channel. Thank you guys a lot. On the first video, I exposed most of the details from episodes 1 to 3 and proposed bigger modifications on episode 3 to better fit the characters from the 400 Days DLC, since they were poorly used, as we already know. And speaking of the 400 Days characters, I'd like to correct myself on something I said in my first video about the characters being determinate or not. I affirmed that Bonnie was determinate as the other people from the DLC, and that's actually not true. I never knew it, but Bonnie will go with Tavia no matter what, and this is something that really tilted my mind when I discovered it recently. This would actually be the reason the writers made her a bigger character than the others that were determinant, but as far as I'm concerned, I don't care. I really think that Wyatt, Vince, and Shell are better characters than her in the DLC, and deserved a bit more of presence throughout Season 2. So, trying to bottom line everything that has already happened so far in the previous video, Kenny could potentially carry Doug's drawing, since we'd retrieve it back in episode 1, and could give it to him on episode 2, right after we meet him at the ski lodge. Mike and Ralph, the guy who attacked Krista, would be a single character, and he'd be working on the group's acceptance after he helped us to escape from house. Speaking of him, there's something I've forgotten to mention, and that's Mike's scar on his cheeks and ear. My guess is that this is a remaining from his Ralph past story, another evidence pointing out that those characters should have been a single person. In a dialogue option during episode 4, Mike could potentially mention how he got that scar, pointing out it was during their attack on Krista on episode 1. Amid the Ruins, episode 4, approached by me on the second video, had many modifications. I proposed that Sarah and Sarita could have survived the episode depending on the player's choices. Arvo would be replaced by Eddie, who would also carry a bag of medicine, and he would join our group. We could choose to ask him for his help, or we could threaten him to do our liking. After AJ's born, depending on whether to leave in the morning or a few days later, we'd meet one of two different foe groups: Carver's people, including the 400 Days crew, who survived the herd attack at House, and a new group who was after Eddie and their stolen bag of medicine. The two groups and our group would break in a violent confrontation, and here episode 5 would start. This is the final video, guys, and I hope you all enjoyed. And remember, you can disagree with anything I say at any time, and you're welcome to leave a comment if you'd like to point out anything about it. Well, with all further ado gone, let's do it. Episode 5, No Going Back, originally called Better to Sleep, which is a way creepier name if you think about it, is sort of a divisive episode in terms of reception. I mean, most people finish this episode emotionally invested, both in the brutal and dark atmosphere, and with Clementine's and Kenny's character arcs coming to an end, independently for what ending you picked. In the first play, I bet nearly everyone are convinced with this conclusion to the season. This has actually been my favorite episode of the entire game series for years since I played it first time. Hell, at the time, I'd even like to say that this here was the greatest the entire franchise has ever been. And when I say this, I meant the games, but the comics and the TV series as well. and I was actually a great consumer of those medias a few years back. However, this episode is not out of critiques, as you might guess already. I've seen people completely loathing this episode for what they did to Luke, for Jane triggering Kenny in the snow, and also the multiple endings thing, since that really screwed things for the New Frontier game. I have a little biased opinion about this episode here. I really like it. However, on making the whole season better, this episode would also have to be altered, and I'll do it, or try to. Kicking right in the start, we'd be in the middle of a war zone. Our group, composed by Kenny, Luke, Bonnie, Mike, also as Sarita and Sarah determinedly, depending on your choices from last episode. We would be caught in the middle of a crossfire between the two groups. Carver's crew, composed by Tavia, Russell, Vince, Shell, and Wyatt, and the medicine owner group who was after Eddie. Things would be crazy and we'd be only trying to stay alive at first. Sarita would be one of the first people to die if she made it this far. Her death would make Kenny crazily enraged and wanting to kill everyone, spraying bullets on anyone who wasn't a part of our group. If Sarita died on a previous episode, he'd also flip, but with a lesser attitude, if you know what I'm saying. Sarah would be given the opportunity to shoot against a few people as well, if you taught her to shoot and survive this far, but she wouldn't survive it past here as well. Luke would get really shocked if he witnessed Sarah dying right in front of him. More on Luke, I'd put a determinate death to him here. So remember on the part to cover Luke or not and he'll get shot in the leg? And this also happens if you leave AJ and get to cover? So if you choose to go to cover before getting AJ, he would die. And if you failed to cover him, he would die as well. So here would be 3 possible people dead only on our group. And in the end of the confrontation, the whole medicine group owner would die, and the whole Carver group would also die, with the exception of one character, Wyatt. Yes, he would be the last one to survive, and would surrender himself to our group. Jane could potentially come back exactly like in a game. Potentially, because in episode 4, I made her farewell to be determined. If she stayed with you the whole time, she'd be a part of the shootout as everybody else. Kenny would get aggressive towards Wyatt, pretty similar to how he does to Arvo in the game, blaming him for the potential death of our companions, including Sarita, and people would try to get Kenny to calm down a bit. In the original game, I feel Luke took a bit of the role of the leader on episodes 4 and 5. And ironically or not, after he dies under the thin ice, everything goes crappy with the group. He was a point of concordance between every single member of the group. Right here, with his death being determinant, the point of concordance would be transferred to Bonnie. She would be able to amend things because she knew Wyatt from the times of the camp and house and would vouch for him. Eddie, knowing him from before, would vote him in, and if alive, Luke would also vouch for him. Kenny would also act furiously towards Eddie, since this was partially his fault too, but he would focus his anger more on Wyatt. There would be a little time to pay some respects for the dead, kinda like it already happens with Rebecca in the original game. To relieve his and Wyatt's back a little, Eddie would tell them to go to the city, the one we see across the river in the previous episode, and it is also depicted in the slide cover for episode 5. The city would be the place where the medicine owner group, the one who was after Eddie, would be previously settled. Since they died there, our group would agree to go there to harvest for any supplies they could find. Wyatt would be treated like a prisoner, and Eddie would be treated like crap by Kenny. Everyone would be afraid of Kenny's behavior, as they already do in the final game. So there's a hub where we heal Luke's leg and change Kenny's eye bandage. Here we wouldn't exactly be healing anyone, but I would still put a moment to talk to Bonnie and Luke. The moment in the game where Luke realizes he's the last member of the cabin group is still really sad. So we would rest for the night, like we do on the electrical plan, but we do it now somewhere in the city. My take is that it could be the church that is both seen by Clem on episode 4 and depicted on that achievement list. We would light a fire and Luke could tell us that it is his birthday. We'd try to have a nice night despite the awful conditions. But people wouldn't be teasing and joking like they do in the episode. I think they're too happy in the scene here. Also, there would be the opportunity to convince people to join the fire. Kenny and Jane, yes, but also Eddie and Wyatt. We would make our way out of the city and head towards the safe house where Eddie stole the medicine from. I put the eye stuff here as well. People say that it was a cheap way to kill off Luke, but as I said, Luke kinda played the leading role. He was a point of concordance between every single member of the group, and his death set its fate. But as I said, Luke wouldn't be the concordance point anymore. It would be Bonnie instead, who would act in favor of Wyatt before Kenny's frequent aggression towards him and Eddie. In the thin ice in the game, Luke will die no matter what, and Bonnie is determinant. In this new version, I'd make Luke to be determinant instead of Bonnie. She would die despite of what we did, and she wouldn't be all bitchy about it, holding Luke's death against us and all. In sort of ways, the whole ice thing would sorta be Wyatt's fault, like it is Arvo's, and Kenny would be really angry at him, beating the crap out of him, as he does in the game. Eddie and Mike would be on Wyatt's side, saying that Kenny had already gone too far. Kinda like it already happens with Mike's character. We'd have time to talk to Jane, Luke, and Kenny, kinda like it happens already. Jane would mention Kenny potentially becoming like Carver. Kenny would basically have the whole truck scene, like it does already, and if Luke survived, he'd be really shocked and depressed by Bonnie's death, kinda connecting to his earlier speech about losing everyone from the cabin group. After Kenny got the working ride, the group would argue where to head next. People would say south, while Kenny would constantly say to go north to find Wellignton. We'd be given the option to side with Kenny or not in the arguments. We'd sleep on it, and in the middle of the night, we'd wake up to see that Mike, Eddie, and Wyatt are at the truck, trying to get it started. Eddie would be the one holding the gun, exactly like Carvo does. I'd have many possible scenarios to this scene, especially if Luke survived. Let me explain. If Luke previously died, both in the shootout or in the thin ice, the scene would play fairly like it does already, with Eddie shooting us if we cried for Kenny or Jane's help, or if we just made a false move. And I would add it up if we shot Mike. When this episode launched on the PS3, there was an option for the player to kill Mike that was taken down via a patch a few hours after the release of the episode. I can't imagine why they would make this and not bring the character back somehow, but you already know how many times these games have been altered and rewritten. Telltale, my friends, nothing out of the ordinary. If Luke survived, he would also wake up in the middle of the night and would barge right in the middle of our conversation. The shock would frighten Eddie, and he would accidentally shoot Luke in the stomach. This would startle Kenny and Jane, and they would come into the scene. Kenny would be furious, shooting on them. The traitors would fled on foot, afraid of him. Luke would survive a little more, but he wouldn't resist the shot and would die. I put here the opportunity to have a really sad moment for his goodbye. We'd bury him and would get into the car to get away from there. Jane would be really sad for Luke's death. Just reminding you people, Lee's flashback would be determinant here, since Clem would have to get shot to dream about him. This is a thing maybe you guys will disagree, but I can't find a way to place the flashback on another part of the episode, if not after Eddie shooting her. From Kenny and Jane arguing in the truck to the choice of shooting or looking away, I'd only add little details. So I'd put an ammo counter to Clem's pistol from the moment she decides to shoot Mike or not until the moment of the big choice. So remember in the middle of the storm before rejoining with Kenny, Clem meets a few frozen walkers and has the option to shoot them or not. If you shoot them all, you would waste your whole ammo and you wouldn't be able to shoot Kenny, both if he's about to kill Jane or if you choose to kill him after he stabs Jane. If they wanted to shoot Kenny but couldn't, I think players would be more lean to leave Kenny after discovering AJ was alive, since I also think very little amount of people actually left Kenny after he kills Jane. Well, about the multiple endings thing, I mentioned how that kinda ruined Season 3 from the start, so I'd alter them a bit. When I first played the game, I liked the alone ending more than any other. Now, I can't help myself but liking the Wellignton endings more. They're more emotional and choice-based. Not only that, but Wellignton has been a theme since episode 1, when Krista mentioned it by the fire. After that, Carver and Matthew talk about it in episode 2 as well. It brings fulfillment to the whole season in a sort of way. So my task is still to have many endings, but all of them will surround Wellignton in some way. I feel Kenny has the best endings. The emotional weight that the two endings have, both entering the gates or living with Kenny, are astonishing, and I feel this was the moment in the season that tears rolled a bit from players' eyes. Nothing would be changed in here. The Jane endings are the ones I feel less engaged in the game. I mean, there are still a few cool details, like looking at Carver's corpse, which somehow wasn't eaten by the walkers. But I feel like the choice of whether letting the family get or not is pretty weak if compared to the choice we make with Kenny. I mean, I like the fact that Clem says the exact thing that Lee said in the flashback. However, that would now be determinant. It wouldn't quite fit in here that well anymore. The two of them would head back south, and in the middle of the journey, would find no one other than Krista herself. There would be a little tension with Jane getting to know who she was, and Clem trying to explain things to Jane at the same time she tried to discover what has happened to Krista during all this time. Conversation after conversation, Krista would be really touched to see that Clem was carrying the baby boy, reminding her of the baby she somehow lost during those 16 months between Omid's death and the first scene in the fire in episode 1. Krista would say she was going north to find Wellignton, and the player would be given the final choice of whether convincing Krista to stay with them or joining her on her journey and leaving Jane alone. The choice of leaving with Krista would be a bit poetic and fulfilling as well, because in the beginning of the game, those two characters were surviving for a long time together, and visibly Krista was bitter to Clementine for what happened to Omid. A character relationship that wasn't explored whatsoever in later games. Krista was just deleted from the map completely, and that's pretty sad. This would actually be a compensating point to balance with the Kenny ending, because the Kenny endings feel so much rewarding if compared to Jane's. Now fighting Krista would reward a bit more of players who stood with Jane. Remember when I said the alone ending was my favorite the first time I played it? At the same time, and until today in sort of ways, I feel this is the one Clem gets more strengthened. Looking at her moistening herself and AJ with walker guts and heading straight to a herd is really badass. But I'm also missing something here, and that would be a choice. Staying with Kenny and Jane, we're faced with the last choice, so why not put a choice in here as well? My feeling is that most people who ended up alone were pissed at Jane and wanted to get away from them, but I highly doubt they actually wanted to stay alone at their own free will. Let me explain better. If let alone, we'd be walking with AJ on our arms until we see a person walking in the distance. We quickly hide to spy on this approaching person, when then we see it's Krista walking alone towards north. AJ would start crying a bit and would be given a final choice to the player, making AJ stop crying so Krista won't notice us there, or directly calling out to her. If you shut AJ up, you'd really want to be away from any people, despite who they are. Bottom lining everything, these are the endings we'd get. Staying on a camp with Kenny nearby Wellignton, or actually entering the Wellignton gates. We could be with Krista traveling north to find Wellignton, both if you choose to stick to her after leaving Jane, or meeting her in the alone ending if deciding not to shut AJ up. You could even be with Jane and Krista settled somewhere in the middle of the resting area at house. If you chose to shut AJ up in the alone ending, you'd be somewhere completely alone. With AJ of course, but still. As I said, all those endings had something to do with Wellignton, with the exception of the completely alone ending and the ending we stay with Jane and Krista. Why privilege Wellignton above other endings, you might ask? Well, one of the reasons A New Frontier was bad was because it practically threw all of the Season 2 endings away so Clem could be alone to start a completely new journey. By making Wellignton a more fixed aspect of the story, the endings would feel less wasted than they were. But how about the alone ending? How about the Krista and Jane ending? How would you direct it on Season 3 to make them worthwhile? Well, whenever I think of many disappointments I have with this franchise, I almost always put my eyes on Seasons 2 and 3, and one that stands out to me is never got to really know what Wellignton is, what it really is. Is it a bad community? Is it a good community? Is it safe? Who's in charge? In Season 3, we saw the community be invaded and destroyed, and then we never got to know anything about them. My point is that Wellignton is a safe haven on an isolated land with big container walls, nearly like a paradise of sorts. When arriving there, Kenny asks if that place is Wellignton, and Edith says, "A lot of people call it that." We never even got to know the real name of the community, for crying out loud. What I'm trying to say here is that Wellignton should have been one of the main focus of Season 3, and in crazy sort of ways, I think that Wellignton and the New Frontier community should have been one thing and the same. I may have gone a bit ahead of myself with this last part of the video, but what I'm saying is that despite the mistakes Season 2 made, they don't come close to the mistakes Season 3 made. And if I made this and another 2 videos trying to improve Season 2, oh yes, you can bet on your asses that I'll do it for Season 3. Hold your horses, A and F, 'cause I'm coming for you. Hey guys, just a little farewell to all of you who made it to the end of the video. As always, I thank you a lot, and I ask that you leave a like, comment, what do you think of this topic, what I should do next for videos I have planned for season 3 as I said, but what do you think? I should do videos analyzing characters, episodes, seasons 1, 4, Michonne. Come on, just leave a comment there, I'll read it. I'll try to answer it, and that's it guys. Remember, give it a like, subscribe, comment, and stay safe y'all. Peace to everyone. Thank you guys a lot as always. Bye.
Dude, you better go up and see Bill. He doesn't like to wait. So, you should probably go!